Imagine checking into a hotel in the bustling heart of 1890 Chicago, a new building owned by a charming and wealthy doctor who assures you of a pleasant stay. What you don't know is that the building isn't just a hotel, it's a machine. The hallways are a confusing maze. Secret passages conceal unspeakable acts, and a chute in your room might lead directly to a basement of horrors. This is the story of H. Holmes, often called America's first serial killer. He was a man who built what the press would later dub the Murder Castle. He was brilliant, elusive, and left a trail of missing persons that baffled police. But as clever as he was, he made one fatal mistake that brought his entire evil empire crashing down. This is the story of how a man who built a labyrinth to hide his crimes got lost in his own web of lies, and how he was finally caught. His real name was Herman Webster Mudgett, born in New Hampshire. He graduated from medical school and possessed an undeniable charm, but he had a dark side. By the time he arrived in Chicago around 1886, he had adopted the alias Dr. Henry Howard Holmes, leaving behind a past of fraud and a family. Chicago in the Gilded Age was the perfect hunting ground. It was a time of incredible progress and, more importantly for Holmes, anonymity. With the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition on the horizon, the city was flooded with tourists and transients, people who wouldn't be easily missed. It was here that Holmes began his masterwork. Across the street from the pharmacy he took over, he started building a massive 3-story structure. While legends claim it took up an entire city block, it was a huge and bizarre building for its time. The press would later call it the Murder Castle. But this was no ordinary building. Holmes designed it himself, constantly hiring and firing construction crews so that only he understood its true, dark blueprint. The ground floor had legitimate-looking shops. The upper floors, however, were a different story. Sensationalized newspaper reports claimed it had over 100 rooms, but the reality was likely less, though still a confusing maze. Many rooms were soundproofed, some staircases led to dead ends, and certain doors could only be locked from the outside. So how did he do it? The legends of a central control panel are likely an exaggeration, but Holmes did have gas jets installed in some rooms, modified so he could asphyxiate his guests. He had secret passageways and peepholes to move through the building unseen, watching his victims. For disposal, his system was brutally efficient. Trapdoors were hidden in closets, connected to chutes that led directly to the basement. Down there, investigators found a dissecting table, vats of acid, and a furnace, which contained traces of human hair and bone. The castle wasn't just a building, it was a factory designed for murder. With his killing machine complete, Holmes set about finding victims. His methods were rooted in seduction and deception. He preyed primarily on women, luring them with his intelligence, wealth, and promises of marriage. Many were hired to work for him, becoming his employees, mistresses, and fiancées, often all at once. One of his early victims was Julia Connor, who worked at his pharmacy. After they began an affair, she and her young daughter, Pearl, vanished around Christmas of 1891. Holmes later gave conflicting stories, including that she died during an abortion. Then there was Emmeline Sigrand, a stenographer he hired. He proposed to her, and then she too disappeared. Holmes was so brazen that police later suspected he had sold her skeleton to a medical school. Next, he got involved with Minnie Williams, a wealthy woman whose fortune he managed to gain control of. Soon after she moved to Chicago, both Minnie and her sister, Nanny, were gone. He told people they had moved to Europe. In reality, they were just 2 more victims consumed by his horrifying enterprise. For years, Holmes operated with impunity. His victims were often newcomers to the city, making their disappearances easy to explain away. He was a master of the lie, a con artist of the highest order. His crimes weren't just about killing. They were deeply tied to financial gain. He would swindle women out of their life savings before disposing of them. It seemed like his dark labyrinth was impenetrable. He was too smart and too ruthless to ever be caught. But that's where he was wrong. The downfall of H. Holmes wouldn't come from a flaw in his castle's design, but from a flaw in his character, his greed. It's hard to believe a man so meticulous could make such a simple mistake. But as we're about to see, it was a straightforward insurance scam that unraveled everything. The story of how investigators finally untangled his web of lies is even more shocking than the castle itself. If you're finding this story as fascinating as we are, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss our next look into the darkest corners of history. After the World's Fair ended, the steady flow of tourists and potential victims dwindled, and creditors started closing in on Holmes. It was time to leave Chicago. He set fire to the top floor of his castle in a failed attempt to collect on a $60,000 insurance policy and fled. This addiction to insurance fraud would be his undoing. His fatal mistake was a scheme he cooked up with an associate, a carpenter named Benjamin Pitezel. Pitezel was a man with a criminal past whom Holmes often used as his right-hand man in various cons. The plan was simple. Pitezel would take out a $10,000 life insurance policy. Then he would fake his own death, and his wife would collect the money, which they would all split. To pull it off, Pitezel went to Philadelphia. Holmes was supposed to find a cadaver to disfigure in an explosion to stand in for Pitezel. But Holmes had a simpler, more sinister idea. Instead of finding a body, he just killed Pitezel for real, knocking him unconscious with chloroform and then setting his body on fire with benzene. Holmes collected the insurance money, but his crime didn't end there. To keep Pitezel's wife, Carrie, from getting suspicious, he told her that Benjamin was alive and hiding in London. He then convinced the grieving woman to entrust 3 of her 5 children, Alice, Nellie, and Howard, to his care, promising he would reunite them with their father. It was a monstrous lie. With the children as his pawns, Holmes began a chilling journey across the American Midwest and into Canada, all while sending reassuring letters to their mother. This was Holmes's critical error. He had become overconfident. While briefly in jail for a horse swindling scheme, Holmes had bragged about the insurance plan to an inmate named Marion Hedgepeth. When Hedgepeth read about Pitezel's death and realized Holmes had cut him out of the deal, he tipped off the authorities. The insurance company, already suspicious, now had a lead. The hunt for H. Holmes began. The Pinkerton National Detective Agency was hired to track Holmes down, and he was finally arrested in Boston on November 17, 1894, for insurance fraud. But the case was about to become much more than that. The 3 Pitezel children were still missing, and their mother was growing frantic. Geyer then tracked Holmes to Indianapolis, where he found the charred remains of young Howard Pitezel in the chimney of another rental house. The gruesome discovery of the Pitezel children turned the case into a national sensation. With Holmes in custody, police in Chicago finally turned their full attention to the mysterious building he had left behind. In July 1895, they entered the Murder Castle. What they found was beyond anyone's darkest imagination. They uncovered the confusing hallways and stairways to nowhere. They found the sinister gas pipes and the chutes leading to the basement. And in that cellar, they found his tools, a blood-stained operating table, vats of acid, and the large furnace. While the full number of his victims there could never be proven, the castle stood as undeniable proof of his monstrosities. H. Holmes was never tried for the crimes he committed in his castle. He was put on trial in Philadelphia in October 1895 for the murder of one man, Benjamin Pitezel. He was quickly found guilty and sentenced to death. After his conviction, the Hearst newspapers paid him $7,500 for his confession. In it, he admitted to 27 murders, though the press and Holmes himself would throw around numbers as high as 130 or even 200. But Holmes was a pathological liar to the very end, and many of the people he confessed to killing were later found to be alive. The true number of people who died inside his castle will never be known. On May 7th, 1896, Herman Webster Mudgett, alias H. Holmes, was executed by hanging. According to newspaper reports, which may have been exaggerated, his neck didn't snap, and he strangled slowly for over 15 minutes before being pronounced dead. Fearful that his own body would be stolen and dissected, he made a final request: to be buried in a coffin filled with concrete. Holmes was a con man, a bigamist, and a swindler. He became a legend because he combined the cold calculation of a financial predator with monstrous cruelty. He built a fortress to commit his crimes, but in the end, it wasn't a brilliant detective or a flaw in his design that brought him down. It was his own greed and arrogance, a simple, sloppy insurance scam that exposed one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. His story is a chilling reminder that sometimes the most intricate traps are the ones we build for ourselves. What do you think? Was Holmes a criminal mastermind, or just a fraud whose evil was amplified by legend? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching. If you want more stories about our history, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We'll see you in the next one.